Okay, so I'm here to talk about the methodological challenges of understanding national well-being. My presentation is called Happy Talk, the Other Voices, Free Text or Forced Choices. So I'm going to look at different methodological approaches to data emanating from the Office for National Statistics, Measuring National Wellbeing, What Matters to You debate. I don't have time to discuss the political narratives behind the debate in detail. However, I hope to convey some sense of how different agendas and approaches to understanding well-being, which draw on the same data, offer not only different but opposing realities of well-being. I go on to suggest, therefore, that this highlights some of the methodological challenges in the measurement and description of well-being on any scale, particularly that of nation. I also intend to allude to broader hopes of my project, that is, to present new perspectives on the methodological opportunities presented by social survey data collection. Specifically, by highlighting the potential for reanalysis of data beyond that which becomes the social indicator. In so doing, I address ESRC concerns regarding data reuse and the methodological challenges facing data collection and analysis associated with well-being. So firstly, a little bit of background to the 5-month debate. It was called What Matters to You, and it ran between November 2010 and April 2011 across various platforms: an online questionnaire and forum, social media, postal submissions, a telephone line, and 175 live events. In creating the debate, the ONS presented a space in which to listen to, discuss, collect and collate descriptions of what was important to individuals and communities in order to understand how to measure what matters for the nation. The outcomes of the debate, as you will see, were portrayed as forming the framework for the measures themselves. So measuring what matters has been used throughout the programme's literatures, including reports and peer-reviewed journals. And here's some text I lifted from the website, where it's very much described as, that the measures will be based on what people say is important to them. So over 34,000 participants took opportunities to describe what mattered to them about well-being in order to have their say and inform these measures. However, I suggest that assembling the well-being measures, which are available to view in this simple-to-read wheel here, may have involved a number of methodological decisions which overlooked opportunities for qualitative methodologies to serve justice to the debate's aims. As David Cameron put it, so that we really know what matters to people. Thus, the various qualities of life found in the debate's narratives and through which people expressed well-being were marginalised. So my analysis returns to answers offered by debate questionnaire respondents who avoided what one participant called the forced choices of the ONS prescribed tick boxes. These respondents chose instead to use free text fields called Other, in attempting to listen, as Les Back might say, to narratives in the free text. I acknowledge the large proportion of respondents who chose to respond to what matters to them using their own words. So in order to do so, I spend a little time conceptualising the unique space and form of the free text field in shaping a conversation between participant authors, those who author their participation in the debate by writing in their own words, and the survey authors who wrote the survey with very specific goals in mind. So I do this in order to conceive, if you like, the grander narratives of national debate and well-being. The questionnaire was both on paper and online, and it's also worth noting that the questionnaire changed in February 2011, about halfway through, and that this changed methods of response. I'm told it's not possible to know how many respondents who ticked health also ticked family, for example, or how many used tick boxes and wrote in the other field. Therefore, comparative analysis of this kind across different methods of the response is not thorough in this presentation, but interesting differences in the type of response are salient, I would argue. What I want to show you here, based on questionnaire 1 only, is the large number of people who chose to describe well-being in their own words. The highest tick box use is indicated using the darker blue on this slide, and free text use using the paler. So for example, in response to question 1, what things in life matter to you, 4,780 people ticked health. 1,533 people used the free text field. Further into the questionnaire, free text field usage exceeds tick box usage by some 30-odd%. So I wanted to know why so many didn't want to use the tick boxes and what this might mean for the reported outcomes of what people said. As you can see, according to reports emanating from the debate, the Blue Table, 89% of respondents to questionnaire 1 ticked health as the most important component to well-being. Now, this isn't surprising, given that health and well-being is not only a common discursive construction, but health is clearly vitally important to everyone. Yet my secondary analysis of free text fields in green discovered that less than 10% of respondents describe health in response to the same question, what things in life matter to you. 89% of respondents indicate the importance of one concept, well-being, i.e. health, via one response method, and 10% describe health via the other. Alternate ways of describing in their analysis can invert realities described by the same social survey. Without careful consideration of method and interpretation, and an understanding of qualitative and quantitative responses, any outcome that can be arrived at can potentially be incredibly misrepresentative. It's important to state I am not insisting my approach is any better than any other, but I want to outline how vital it is to acknowledge these differences. Official reports on the debate are unspecific about the ONS's approach to the qualitative debate data, although one representative I spoke to at Parliament didn't know even if they still have the debate data and was surprised anyone would want to look at it. There appears to be no formal obligation to demonstrate how qualitative data is analysed, despite it dominating the debate, or indeed stored, despite publication of academic papers on other quants elements of the debate. As a result, it's not possible to state whether certain methodologies were marginalised, either purposefully, as a result of resource necessity, or as a result of a lack of skills or knowledge of dealing with description-rich data. However, the different outcomes from different analyses of the survey data do highlight the methodological challenges and the power of what John Law and others in STS call knowledge producers in creating realities of well-being through how they describe its meaning to the nation. Hayden White, in 1987, saw narrative as a possible solution to a problem of general concern, namely the problem of how to translate knowing into telling. In the case of knowledge producers, telling narratives of well-being, methods of interpretation and translation must be considered and clearly communicated with any results. Now, there are clear methodological challenges here, including, the knowledge gathering section, how to translate the knowing of the survey author into asking a question. In other words, how can the person writing the survey ask the right question in the right way using universal language? In analysing free text responses, there are specialised challenges. How do we translate the telling of the participant author, their narrative, into knowledge, whilst also retaining, the authenticity, like what it is that they're trying to say about themselves and their world? How can you turn what someone says of their everyday life into something that can be used on the grand scale of policy making? Normally this involves some element of coding and aggregation, but how to do this without losing its vital meaning? But also how to tell what was told. So, how to ensure, we need to ensure the inclusion of everyday ways of knowing. This means that narratives of well-being as they were told by debate participants should be conceived as and expressed as qualities of life, as found in the spaces such as the free text fields called other. So these free text fields are often included in questionnaires. I'm sure we're all familiar with them, for people to elaborate on options given as tick boxes. Often signposted other, these fields offer individuals an opportunity to answer survey questions using their own words. Now, this is useful to the participant who may not find tick boxes sufficient to respond to the question. A number of respondents to the wellbeing debate elected to use the other field because they found the scope of choices limiting, or there were too many forced choices and assumptions. Others found the tick boxes alienating. These tick boxes are all relevant to government and public bodies. Is this inevitable? Often this was an issue of language, with whoever wrote the question, i.e. the survey authors, using terminology perhaps too specific to their frame of knowledge and practices, as implied by the comment, "Do you really expect people to understand what these options mean?" So sometimes writing in a free text field, the participant author is unfamiliar with certain nuances of language. Question 7, for example, asked which of the following ways would best give a picture of national well-being. One participant wrote, "Some sort of graph as a picture is required." This respondent's very literal interpretation of the question suggests the metaphor painting a picture is unfamiliar, indicating cultural differences between the survey author and participant author, and the importance of understanding that in the interpretation of questions and answers. These free text fields provide a space in which a response that is more representative of the participant's understanding of the world can be communicated, as is described by case 18, which was on the previous slide. I do not think any of these indicators will be useful. Better would be a much smaller but in-depth study asking people for their stories, as in well-being for me means, and the nation I would like to live in would be. In this sense, free text fields can be a space of more authentic communication as long as the other is listened to appropriately. In the case of analysing free text fields, I would suggest that the participant's author response should be read inclusively. And I argue for two emphases when I say the word inclusive. Firstly, all responses demand the reader's attention, in this scenario the survey author, no matter how these responses are rendered. This is because everyone's opinion on their own well-being is relevant in a debate asking the nation what matters. Therefore, if a reader makes an analytical shortcut in the interests of efficiency and necessity in programmes with a limited budget, they may eliminate those thought irrelevant from a glance. In so doing, a value judgment is made on who to include prior to careful reading or indeed listening to what they have to say. And this leads me to the second reason, which is that it's imperative to analyse each description in its entirety when trying to understand a complex concept such as well-being, rather than just coding sections which the survey author has predetermined as important before any analysis has taken place. In other words, defaulting to a predetermined coding frame, most likely represented in the tick boxes. So this space, created through the inclusion of a free text field, therefore presents a place of conversation between the two authors, the survey author and the participant author, that some of the responses contain extensive contributions, as we can see here, further demonstrates the eagerness of the participant author to engage in this conversation. Participants' responses often convey a sense that they are really trying to tell something of the world, of their world, or indeed how they see the world, even if this is imposed and within the alien frames of a government social survey. In this space, then, both authors are arguably vying for the position of debate author, wanting to describe the world in their own terms, and I would argue this is key to understanding what matters. So despite the prevalence of free text fields in survey, there's very little discussion or guidance on how they might be analysed or even used, and concerns regarding efficiency in survey methodology often justify their omission or minimal attention in analysis. According to Janet Scott and al. In 2009, survey design is evolving and these free text fields are gaining recognition as a valuable data source suitable for content, thematic and narrative analysis. My analysis of the well-being debate and its free text responses suggests a value judgment was probably made, possibly down to efficiency, which left this data unexplored to its full potential. Now, whilst it's not entirely clear how or whether the ONS analysed or ignored these other fields at this stage, it is typical to code in some way when analysing a dataset of this size, and a coder will ordinarily backcode into the existing coding frame. This will most likely correspond to the forced choices, i.e. the tick boxes, which the participant elected to not use in the first place. So analysis of ONS releases and reports suggests that even if analysis of these narratives took place, it quite probably fell into what are known as coding traps. Either coding too much too quickly, or being too close to the aims of the data collection to analyse it objectively. These coding traps might support an assumption of backcoding where data was retrofitted to predetermined outcomes of a debate, and arguably that which could be found in the tick box labels. Such coding practices are quite reasonably argued as resulting from a need for efficiency, a resource issue. It can also be argued that this may be because the debate was designed to create a reality in which well-being measures exist, rather than one primarily concerned with listening to participants' well-being realities. So a quote from the free text field serves as an example of ONS's coding approach. And this is one which is known because the ONS actually give this quote and allocate it, say what it means. So I would hate for someone to be worrying about whether they will have something to eat or a roof over their head, Also, doing other things, including recreation activities, improves your mental well-being, which in turn affects your general well-being. But you can only do those things if you are in a good financial position. So the ONS chose this quote to best represent personal finance in its 2012 Life in the UK report. Yet beyond basic needs of shelter and food, recreation activities are considered most important to well-being for this respondent. Whilst the implication is that this participant author sees financial position as imperative, it is only because that facilitates access to qualities of life which impact positively on different modes of well-being. To understand this narrative as simply representing finance suggests analysis methods were less generous to the rich personal accounts of what aspects of well-being were important to their individual sense of well-being than the previous ONS report on the debate indicated they were attempting to do. So whilst I acknowledge the importance of tackling increasingly negative, widening financial inequalities on people's quality of life, there's no, my project is not trying to do that in any way. When analysed as narratives, the qualitative data suggests that qualities of life as various forms of participation are more significant than personal finance. For example, whilst economic security is important, I don't think these economic-related indicators should be the focus of measuring national well-being. I think this exercise should break away from the traditional areas already measured excessively and focus instead on measuring the areas that genuinely make people happy. Social connections, participating in local community and personal activities, access to green open space, etc. So my secondary analysis indicates that 40% of free text responses to the question, what matters to you, refer to leisure, or how and where people spend their spare time, and the quality of that time and place. Remember how significant this is if less than 10% of people say health. So from a policy-making perspective, this might offer insight regarding access to services which provide recreation activities, or the importance of reserving areas from development by financiers, and this is incredibly important at the moment in austerity measures and all of the conversation about property prices. However, if these narratives were coded using some of the shortcuts or traps, policy decisions will not be based on what matters to people as described in their own words, but instead hierarchies of importance that were preconceived by the survey's designer when writing the tick boxes. Many of these other narratives are equally complex, and so efficient analytical approaches seem unlikely to be able to represent what the respondent says accurately. Therefore, aggregating shortcut analyses to represent a snapshot of the nation is deeply problematic for policymaking. If research participants' opinions or experiences of well-being are not represented adequately in outputs, one might question how the debate and wider Measuring National Wellbeing programme could represent the interests of the nation over those of research designers. And it's this tension that highlights the important role for an analyst independent of the research framework. Not only can the independent researcher see new potential for data to ask different questions and answer different problems, as Savage says, but distanced from the context of its creation, I argue they have better claims to impartiality. So in light of this, I sought an alternative methodology which listened to the narratives found within the free text fields called Other. Such investigative epistemology, as Jennifer Mason discusses, has driven previous secondary qualitative data reuse, specifically encouraging qualitative researchers to be purposefully investigative about data and to be creative and interpretive in what they might make from them. So, this investigative epistemology and how it was performed, as John Law might say, is corroborated methodologically by the content of the free text fields themselves. Participants wanted to be listened to. You're talking to people about their lives, not selling them a product. Empathy and understanding with how you word your surveys will make people actually give a damn and want to take part, as they believe, rightly or wrongly, that they are being listened to and their opinion might just count for something. As one might expect when listening to narratives of other, they were very diverse in content, generating a large number of codes, 75 in fact, as I outline. Without preset ideas regarding what the code should be, I allowed the codes to make themselves apparent for the first 250 narratives, around 10%, with the act of listening motivating my coding approach. To expand on this analogy further, my method was informed by what the participant author described, rather than what the survey author may have designed. So approaching the qualitative data in this way, the participant author gains a voice or a hand in the production of knowledge, rather than this remaining in the hands of knowledge producers. Such an approach often required numerous codes for any one particular narrative. Multi-coding was necessary as the meaning of the narrative would shift if coding was too generalised, and retaining the integral meaning and complexity of the whole narrative was paramount to my project. Secondary analysts are thought too detached from field workers and respondents to analyse data accurately, and their processes are assumed to produce codes which become the data. The emphasis on embodied knowledge is less relevant in the interpretation of survey data, I would argue, and therefore that secondary analysis has much to offer because it is detached from the survey authors and their intentions and their predetermined codes. It is this distance which provokes the investigative epistemological approach typical of secondary data analysis. In the case of analysing the wellbeing debate data, approaching analysis from a position which is removed from data collection processes inspired the listening method, which I argue generated codes closer to the data itself than analysis available from the ONS. And this is especially significant in highlighting the ultimate and unique epistemological privilege of the other narrator as participant author, rather than that of the researcher, the survey author, or the analyst, in my case. In acknowledging the performativity of methodologies, I attempt to recognise the potential performativity of other actors as author, including myself as researcher, rather than being limited to what feel like solid and reliable realities of knowledge making and representation. So Janet Scott and all suggest that beginning with everyday realities in great detail is necessary for scientists trying to understand the world, as opposed to survey authors who naively rely on numerical survey responses without considering the interpretive value of descriptive comments. The latter habitual approach discounts the level of national engagement in a debate on its own well-being and ignores the opportunities of free text fields offer to survey authors for reflecting upon and improving upon their own methodological practices. Without inclusive and reflexive engagement, the social survey and the social scientists remain limited to imagining the nation, as Savage and Burroughs say, rather than understanding it. Thank you.